What's going on, everybody? This is the Blockchain Backer, bringing you the latest cryptocurrency news and analysis. Today, we'll be looking over here at the Bitcoin price chart as overnight, heading into the start of the new week, we saw a liquidation happen in the crypto market where Bitcoin fell from about 115,500 all the way down to 112. Ethereum went and slammed the lows that we had from back over here on August 20th. XRP slammed the lows there from September 2nd, and the entire altcoin market took a knockback there from that all-time high, and that all-time high record daily close that we saw there last Thursday. Now, last week on Friday, of course, we were watching the Russell 2000 to see, hey, are we going to be able to maintain what happened there on Thursday, where we did close into record high pricing? Then, as the day on Friday transpired, it pulled back down below the high. This is pre-market pricing happening here today on Monday. But obviously, we have this pullback happen here on Friday where that high is lost, that November 25th high is lost. The weekly candle closes right here. And those breadth dynamics occur once again in the market where we see the NASDAQ, S&P, and Dow all go high there on Friday, yet the Russell 2000 lost about 0.75%. And then throughout the weekend, of course, we see nice big fat liquidation of epic proportions over here in the crypto market, as within the last 12 hours, we've seen $1.59 billion liquidated. And that all happened within an hour, over $1 billion. Definitely one of the biggest liquidations on record. And of course, definitely the biggest one that we have seen certainly in these last 6 months. So, that begs the question of what are we going to see happen in the stock market this week as it gets set to open, and how are things going to transpire coming off of the Fed cut that happened last week? We'll have to see how this thing goes here for the Russell. Like many, after these huge liquidations happen, it takes some time to sit there and process and say, okay, where did we go to? Did we find any technical supports that happened in here? Did we technically break things that are happening in the market? Is it over? Was that the bottom? Are we done with the liquidation? Is there more to come? When these things happen within a couple of hours, kind of have to just give it a moment to settle. So I'm just going to kind of give you things that I'm looking at here kicking off Monday morning, where it's still several hours before the United States stock market even opens, and just what I'm seeing throughout the market. Of course, the concern with Bitcoin is that still it's just transpiring one of these things to play out in here. We'll come back to Bitcoin and talk about different ideas as well on whether or not this could also just end up being an A, B, C happening in here. So we'll come back to that. The big thing watching over here really more so is with Ethereum. Barring that, there's not some major liquidation coming for the US stock market or coming for the Russell 2000. And this thing just rejects from here and it becomes nasty, ugly town, which is always possible, but assuming it's not. And we go back and look at it through that big lens that we've been talking about in the last couple of weeks of just really what it's been like for Ethereum for the last several years, what it was like for Bitcoin during 2018 through 2021. That this light pink right here, this is the Russell 2000 back in 2018 through 2021. That's the same for Ethereum up in here as well, right? And so what do we have? We have the crash, the retrace, the reaccumulation, and then back to the highs. Same here for Bitcoin back in 2018 to 2021. The crash, the retrace, the reaccumulation, back to the highs. Here we are back at these highs once again. You've got the Russell 2000 attempting to break out. We poke out of there on Thursday. It pulls back on Friday. Market liquidates on the weekend. But like just mentioned moments ago, right? Was that the end of it, right? Was that the whole thing? Well, the thing that I noticed that is interesting about these liquidations that happen here in the market overnight, and whether or not they're going to hold, we'll have to find out throughout today and tomorrow. But the technical level that they actually ended up hitting is that Ethereum pinpoint nailed its low from August 19th. And it happens on a major liquidation in the market, $1.6 billion. And then when you look at it from just the technical behavior of how it happened, what occurs? It falls, it retraces back to the 702, and then it goes into a massive liquidation to pinpoint nail the low. I remember something like that happening during C19 back in 2020. This is obviously a much bigger time frame, a different phase of the market, but the technical behavior was very similar, in which what we saw was price roll down, goes back to a retracement, and then it just liquidates in a straight line right back exactly to the support level. And at the end of that liquidation, that marked the low, right? With Ethereum over here on the right side now, conceptually, the idea being that that's what we saw, right? You saw price roll down, go back to the 702 retracement, waddles itself sideways here, just below the 382, right? Low sideways below 382, and then comes a massive liquidation right back down to the lows. Same story, massive liquidation right back down to the lows. So it held at a very peculiar spot for a massive liquidation to hit the market. That story is also true over here on XRP for it to be able to hold this low with precision here from September 1st to go down and pinpoint whack it. If you were a bull on the XRP price chart, your argument would essentially have to be that this was an ABC correction, this was impulsive wave number 1, and that this was wave number 2 within ABC, and it still hold that level. If it breaks below that level, that totally gets invalidated and you open up a whole nother door. We'll come back to that in a minute. Another thing you could look at would be Solana. So this is a chart we brought up on the channel multiple times. I'm not a big Solana guy. It's nothing personal against Solana. It's, one of the most developed coins. It's got the most user activity, high TVL, everything like that. On paper, it looks great. Nothing against it. And frankly, it's creating a structure that you would think would end up breaking up into a parabola. And when you look at this liquidation that happens right in here as well, even structurally of what we've been talking about, it's not all that crazy for something like that to happen. That it's been confined and it finally got itself a breakout. That's really exactly what does happen in these types of structures in here, to have this type of really aggressive knockback to come back and hit. So it's not as if it has structurally completely broken on here. The obvious thing is it hit the 786 retracement and pulled back. Well, in this circumstance, we hit the all-time high and pulled back. So with the current level that it's gotten to right here, it's not all that bizarre for it to have to come back and slam back into that price level, and sometimes doing it quite violently. That story changes, right, if we start kind of getting down into these areas, because then we're no longer just back testing some type of a breakout. We start having appearances of trend changes, right? So if what we saw today is actually the end of it, where it's a $1.6 billion liquidation where we just come back and hit supports, well, you could argue there's several things here on these charts that say that it's okay. The challenge comes over here on Bitcoin and what this is, because this is highly complicated of what's happening on this thing. I still couldn't tell you with any strong level of conviction on if it's just something like that or if this is going to be some type of ABC. The one thing I can say is that we've talked about, we'll keep an eye on it and see if it ends up being like one of these things, and if it goes and shoots onto a parabola. Well, if you were to expect that this was a micro version of this, which this was a micro version of 2022 and 2023, well, when you were in here, you likely would have expected these levels to be able to hold and then for price to be able to pull up from right there, because you essentially would be in that environment back at that 618 retracement. It would just be holding, pulling off one of these guys right in here, and then try to shoot its way up. So to break its way back down, it really changes that up, right? So performing this type of action opens the door for that to still be the top. However, that move right there doesn't necessarily mean that we're not going to still come back, right? For example, back in 2018 and 2017, even though the top was in, even though you got back to that 618 retracement right in there, prices did fall back, yet the market still continued back to a retracement after dipping a little lower and coming back. And then that's where the market really rolled over from. So I think that is still open and in play, but would again reiterate that there probably still isn't going to be a big Bitcoin show that's happening in here. The big element to be watching will be if this ends up just being an altcoin show into the remainder of that happening, and if this becomes a Russell show where the Russell is able to get out of here and it doesn't have its third rejection off of these tops. So right now you could create your arguments in here for still bullish setups for the altcoin market and Ethereum's price levels here of not even dipping below that 786 retrace. Well, you could see that in here, right? These things still just held above that 786 retrace. So you'd be pretty much jumping the gun pretty early at this point right here to be sitting here and saying, nope, we're crashing and crumbling from here, because even in here, you could see that we still come down to these price levels. This isn't an unusual price level to be at. I think the complicated picture is more so just Bitcoin. So with what we've seen so far with Ethereum today and the price levels that it's held, so far so good. You go blasting through these things later today, and like an hour after I release this video, well, then that story changes. We got to repaint the whole picture all over again and assess it at that time. But you could see where it's at right now after this $1.6 billion liquidation. It held at a pretty technical level. XRP as well held at a pretty technical level, be it the same kind of story that like you don't really have a whole lot of strong arguments if we go breaking below here as well. If we start breaking below 269, the story gets real iffy because you can create your Elliott wave argument here to say that is an impulsive move off of the lows, and typically in wave 3, you're going to see 3 really clear defined impulsive waves that happen within here. So a very clear 5-wave structure typically shows up in that 3rd wave, and then a 3-wave ABC in which the only Elliott wave that you're allowed to do that on to come back and slam the lows is on wave 2. You are allowed to do that, and then you go on 3, 4, and 5, and you keep shooting your way up. I can't say the hard thing about that is like just personally, I kind of had hoped that wouldn't end up happening because it adds so much complexity to the chart. I had really hoped for something more clean that would show up in here and that we would potentially just hold this 4th wave right here and then be able to continue marching on from there. Even though I didn't share that on the channel, that was something I was personally hoping for, and just that it would be something more along the lines of that. So while you still have an argument here on the XRP price chart with Elliott wave counts off the lows, ABCs back to the lows, the technical levels that it held, and then the confluence of what we're seeing with things like Ethereum, this door still remains wide open to where if we go breaking below $2.69, that we are at risk of a actual technical trend change happening on XRP on a much larger time frame. And I know we're all zoomed in on this stuff in here, but zoom out a little further and we're pretty way up there from where we were just a year ago, right? But you start creating that argument of a trend change happening, barring that you start breaking below this 618 retracement level happening in here. And I think we kind of have that on multiple different things, like we're talking about with the Elliott waves. For the Elliott wave theory to be validated, it would have to mean that this low ends up holding here at 269. If it goes breaking below there, then we don't have any type of Elliott wave thing going on in here at all. And at current price levels of where you're at right now place you in a similar situation to like what we saw with Cardano, kind of like being way up there. I do get it. Nobody likes hearing that. Making YouTube videos, putting this type of stuff on the screen, you're bound to get more thumbs downs than in a typical video. But this isn't something new or something I'm dropping a bomb on you on this channel. This has been brought up in multiple videos and on Markets in the Morning a half dozen to a dozen times, including over here in the newsletters. Right. So what would be the idea if this ends up happening in here? If we end up breaking down in here, what are the other things you would probably end up seeing at the exact same time? You would probably be seeing Ethereum breaking down. You'd probably be seeing Bitcoin breaking down. You'd probably see a strong rejection continuing here on the Russell 2000, just kind of confirming all of those things at the exact same time. Right now, today, I don't think you have a lot of those things. You have a major liquidation that scares the crud out of the market, right? So everybody's going to be emotional today, no doubt, watching this. I try to calm that like crazy emotional stuff by saying, hey, look at these types of things, right? It was a very technical level that ended up hitting in here after a very technical behavior that happened in here. So it's interesting, right? It's not doomsday yet, right? You could totally hold here, right? I've given you Elliott wave counts to say, hey, you could technically still hold here. But where do things start getting dicey, right? They get dicey if we go lower. Right? The market kind of tested it and said, hey, that's an important level. We'll liquidate to there and we'll hold there, right? That's an important level. We break below that level, it just becomes real hard to present a bullish thesis, right? And you'll have everybody pulling out every moving average possible, everything, blah, blah, blah. We're going to $1,000, whatever. And I can only present things that I can find data for and show to you and not be guru, here's why it's going to do this or here's why it's going to do that. I can just show you the things and say, here's why. I would think if we end up seeing something like that happening, it's because we're seeing just massive rejections happening everywhere. The Russell 2000 has failed to get out of the high. Ethereum's failed to get out of the high. Bitcoin's crumbling. Everything has faltered together, right? Right now in pre-market, the Russell's not indicating that to be the case, right? Still, the highest close in history happened last week, and it's not like we've even dipped below that during pre-market trading, but we'll be keeping an eye on this throughout the week, right? Like, it becomes very hard to not be an outrageous bull if the Russell is capable of busting out of here. I mean, that's just a historical basis of the whole market. I've talked about this 1,000 times on the channel, and that's what we need, right? And so last week, obviously, we get it. We get the all-time high close for the Russell. We get the all-time high close for the total two. They pulled back on Friday. We get a weekend liquidation. Now we get to see how is this week going to respond in broader markets. And if this week responds in broader markets with the Russell 2000 actually busting out of here, what do you think is going to happen with Ethereum, right? What do you think is going to happen with the rest of the market? It's probably going to bust out of here. So it's hard to make a judgment call to say that was anything more than just an absolute margin liquidation of people who longed with leverage into the Fed rate cut. But I think it's a pretty important level, or pretty interesting level, to see where we are with these things, with them hitting these support levels, similarly to how we've seen these types of behaviors happen before, and these perfect liquidation nails of those lows. But we'll let it breathe throughout the rest of today. We'll see how the Russell responds. And of course, throughout this week, the big thing is to see, can the Russell actually get a clear defining breakout and end the week there? So we have some interesting holds that have happened here today, whether it be XRP, whether it be Ethereum, in situations we've seen before, and even over here on Solana, with it just really going back to a technical level that isn't unusual, with a violent move to do it. So the first step of today, of course, is to see these levels continue to hold. Ethereum continues to hold. Can the Russell give us something to be excited about this week? And of course, XRP continuing to hold as well. I've shown you some thoughts on how these have hit technical levels at this point, and given you some ideas on things that would start to make me actually concerned. And the broad thesis of that concern would technically have to be that the Russell would be rejecting from the high, and that total 2 would have to be rejecting from the high, which we've climbed all of 2023, 2024, and 2025. There were technical slams that happened, as discussed here with Ethereum, even in events like this, showing how you can have those technical slams happen in things even like this, where you come back and just crush it, like we just saw, that inevitably just turn their way back up. So we'll let it breathe today, see if the Russell cooperates, see if that's the floor for crypto after one of the biggest liquidation events in history of over $1.5 billion. But also happening at very technical levels that otherwise do happen in markets while still not breaking these support levels. I'd say the most bullish aspect of it was that it was a major liquidation that happened to wipe out all of the leveraged and margin gamblers. I know the people who do that don't like hearing that, but the reality is the market doesn't really like rewarding that behavior. And a lot of times we can see these types of events happen before the bigger move ends up happening to wipe out all that leverage first. But we'll let it play out. We see there were a lot of support levels that were hit during this moment, and no major support levels were actually broken on the bigger charts. So we'll watch it throughout the week. And of course, the message remains the same. Watching that Russell 2000 to see if it can give crypto the signal to go for it. So we'll check in on it this week. I hope that you guys had a good weekend. Obviously, waking up Monday like this, nobody likes it, but it is what it is. And I showed you all the things on the charts to show you those support levels that got hit. So we'll keep an eye on it, and I'll check on it soon. But all right, that's going to be it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. You guys can check out the newsletter over here at blockchainbacker.substack.com. The most recent one has a 43-minute audio recording down here where I do record these after I write them. There's a link down here in the description of this video to the newsletter at blockchainbacker.substack.com. Otherwise, I'll check in with you guys on Wednesday in markets in the morning. You know, if I can find a way to put out a video tomorrow, I'll try my hardest. I don't think I've put out a video on a Tuesday in several months. If you guys know, there's a lot going on in my personal life, and Tuesdays have always been occupied by something else that we have going on. And I get it, the timing's never perfect, but it's just kind of always been on Tuesdays, and it's been that way for months. So we'll see what happens. I can't promise anything for Tuesday, but definitely I'll see you guys on Wednesday. But in the meantime, of course, check out the newsletter, and otherwise we'll be together and we'll go through everything on Wednesday. But all right, that's going to be it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you could, please like this video and give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can be notified of when I create new content and when I go live. As always, this is not investment advice, and I am not a financial advisor. But if you ever need a pick-me-up or a little bit of reassurance, just remember that the blockchain backers got your back. Have a good one.